A new report finds that the individuals that are telling you what to eat and the advisory committee that created the 2020 Dietary Guidelines are heavily conflicted. It turns out that among the 20 members that sat on this advisory committee, only one did not have an industry tie to either big food companies or a pharmaceutical company. And here's a screenshot here from the Dietary Guideline recommendations. Low-carb diets are X'd off, meaning that you probably shouldn't eat a low-carb diet according to these so-called experts that, needless to say, have ties to General Mills and Kraft and Nestle and Abbott and all of these major big food companies. It's actually quite wild that dairy is now off the list. You should be eating grains. 25% of your calories, according to this committee of experts, should come from grains, legumes, vegetables, and fruits. We shouldn't be having processed meats of any kind, and so forth. So this paper that I would strongly encourage you to download and read is titled Conflicts of Interest for Members of the U.S. 2020 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. Really important. And so Nina Teicholz has done a great job in this field and helping us better understand all of the conflicts of interest and really how the American Heart Association started, all of the sort of conflicting evidence with regards to whether or not saturated fat actually increases your risk of developing coronary artery disease, and the connections with cholesterol and outcomes when it comes to strokes and major adverse cardiovascular events. She's done an amazing job. And so she was part of this analysis that looked at scientific publications. That's how they were able to figure this out. So there was 20 advisory members that constructed the 2020 U.S. Dietary Guidelines. Now, this is really important because this is what helps tell Americans basically what to eat, what foods are healthy. Most people do not have degrees in nutrition. Most people are not watching YouTube videos like you and subscribing to podcasts and really diving into this on a deeper level, right? They go to the grocery store. They believe that the American Heart Association endorsed cereal is healthy. They hear that whole grains are healthy and it lowers your cholesterol. So therefore they start to buy these sorts of foods. And so the way that these labels and sort of slogans get thrown on food is from U.S. Dietary Guidelines. And so these committee members, it turns out 95% of them are heavily conflicted and have ties to, as I mentioned, Abbott Nutrition, Nestle Nutrition, Kraft, General Mills. And they reported that none of them had any conflicts of interest. But then when Teicholz et al. Actually looked at the Web of Science and looked at PubMed, and they looked at some of the papers and the articles in peer-reviewed journals that these individuals were either part of the editorial process or publishing process or primary authors on, in the conflicts of interest and disclosure section of those papers, many of these people were either advisors, paid consultants, or direct employees or paid speakers for many of these big food companies. Yet that wasn't disclosed during the actual committee. You had to go back and look through in the last 5 years if they had ties to industry. Now, it's hard to make the assumption that these people are not somehow biased by the very institutions that also sponsor their research or pay them to speak and give them honorariums and beyond. So we're going to dive into this. But first, friends, I just want to say thank you for being here. If you're enjoying the content, please share this video with a friend so that they understand what's going on with our food. There's a lot of problems here in America. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the solutions going forward. But I want to let you know that this video is brought to you by our friends over at bondcharge.com, the makers of the most effective blue light filtering glasses. Look, if you're on your phone, if you're on your computer, especially if you work in tech or you even watch YouTube videos all the time, you should be protecting your eyes. It turns out that blue light is actually really problematic for melatonin secretion in the evening time. So as you've heard many people talk about, you should be intentional about getting good daylight and sunlight in the early part of the day, but you need to be extra intentional, especially as you get older, about artificial light, particularly blue light in the evening time. It turns out that your smartphone and your computer and even television release a lot of artificial blue light that can compromise the release of melatonin and lead to changes in your circadian clock system and also sleep quality and sleep duration, which is problematic. So I've been using the Bond Charge blue light filtering glasses for close to 6 years now. They make some of the best and scientifically backed blue light filtering glasses, and they come in a range of different types of lenses and shapes and sizes that will fit your face. We need to be more intentional about wearing our blue light filtering glasses during the fall and winter months because the days are short and the nights are long. And so you should be protecting your circadian clock system as well as the health of your eyes by going to bondcharge.com/HIH to save on their amazing blue light filtering glasses. I will link the pair that I use in the description below, and you can save with the code HIH at checkout. So getting back to this paper, I think this is just incredibly fascinating that the advisory committee, the 20 members didn't list that they had any conflicts of interest. But then when the investigators of this study went to look in the Web of Science and looked at PubMed, they actually found that 19 of the 20 advisory committees members either were paid consultants, either had research funded by Abbott, Nestle, Kraft, General Mills, and all these food companies, and also pharmaceutical companies, or they were advisory committee members, or they were paid speakers receiving an honorarium for these different companies. Now, they have to be conflicted. I mean, how could they not be conflicted? And so when you see the pendulum constantly swinging when it comes to nutrition, especially the nutrition advice foisted upon us by our own government. I mean, I remember in the late 90s, I thought that I had to have 9 to 11 servings a day of healthy whole grains. You know what that did for me and many other people? That made us overweight. It made us pre-diabetic. It caused all sorts of challenges, right? I remember thinking like, God, I have to eat this bread today because it's so healthy. Like it's on the bottom of the food pyramid. Well, it turns out that even back then, these individuals were heavily influenced by the very companies, these same industry actors, Kraft, General Mills, Nabisco, that are actually influencing the current Dietary Guideline Advisory Committee members. And so these individuals are heavily conflicted, which means that the advice that they're recommending needs to be taken with a grain of salt. That's the take home here. Now, it would be nice if we lived in such a world where these individuals were not getting so much research dollars funded by the very companies that are making hyper-palatable, ultra-processed foods and call into question the deleterious health effects and ramifications linked with consuming these processed foods, but this is a reality that we live in. Now, the way that these food companies sort of dance around the fact that these foods are unhealthy is they say that everything can be eaten in moderation. That's what they tell you. Well, a few Oreos is not that bad as long as you balance your overall energy intake. A few sips of Coke is not that bad as long as you don't overconsume, the soda or the Capri Sun or the Pop-Tarts. But the challenge is, as many of you know, there's been a lot of individuals that formerly worked in the tobacco industry that are now part of big food, and they intentionally make these foods hyper-palatable and addictive so that it's almost impossible to have just one Oreo or one Pop-Tart or one Cheez-It or one Pringle. I mean, how many times have you in the past or recently bought a bag of potato chips, whether it's Doritos or Pringles or whatever, and you look down and you've eaten the whole bag because they're intended to be hyper-palatable and addictive. So this idea that all these unhealthy foods can be eaten in moderation and Americans just need to learn how to better moderate their consumption, it's not really totally fair. These foods are intended to be hyper-palatable and quasi-addictive. And if you look at the history, after years and years of denying that tobacco products are highly addictive and harmful, and once there was more regulation and warning labels placed on tobacco, thanks to the government recommending that, many of the tobacco companies, as their sales were declining, started to buy up food companies. And many of the people that made tobacco highly addictive now started to work for major food companies. And they leverage those same tactics that enabled massive sales of tobacco to be part of the process of increasing sales of hyperpalatable processed foods. And this is not a conspiracy theory. Multiple lines of evidence now support this. One study that was actually published in the British Medical Journal titled "Tobacco Industry Involvement in Children's Sugary Drink Market." The marketing tactics remain from former tobacco personnel, and they're using those same tactics to market unhealthy foods, particularly Capri Sun and sugar-sweetened beverages, to children, and using cartoon characters and all this. And this was actually used early on in tobacco on cigarettes to market to younger people, to make cigarettes more appealing to younger people, to make them better lifelong customers. And unfortunately, their health was very compromised as a consequence of that. So I want to thank Nina Teicholz for publishing this paper, which I will link in the description below so you can download this. Again, finding 95% of the 20 members, that is 19 of the 20 members, are heavily conflicted with both pharmaceutical and big food ties. That's a problem, my friends. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section below. I'm grateful that you tuned all the way in, and we'll catch you on a future show down the road.